This is a tutorial on the residential lease or rental agreement. We start here on line 1, the date that we're preparing this form. Then we have the landlord's name and the tenant's name. And you'll see that I put some sample information here. Then down here we have names of occupants. Now, these are people that are going to occupy the premises but aren't mentioned as a tenant. Typically this would be kids or a relative that's going to be living on site with the tenant. Down here we have the address of the property, parcel number, which you can get from the landlord or even the assessor's website, county website. If there's an agent involved, you'll put the name of the brokerage. And if there's no agent involved, you can just put an NA here, not applicable. Right here on line 18, we have the amount of the security deposit. And if we jump down, line 28 begins the rent payment section. Now it says the tenant shall pay, and you'll put how much the lease payment is. $3,000, and we put as a sample per month. And you can put a short-term amount if, let's say, the tenant wants to pay weekly or it's some sort of vacation rental. You could do weekly or even a shorter frequency. And if there's a custom arrangement, you can check this box and write in that custom arrangement here. By default, the contract is set up that rent is due the first day of the month, but if you want to change that to another date, just check the box and write it in. It has a commencement date. We put it at the first day of the second month of 2020. And then a termination date. We just did a little 1-year lease here as a sample. Line 35 addresses how that tenant's going to pay the landlord. You can check the box, the appropriate box. Each page is going to have landlord initials and tenant initials at the bottom. Moving on. Now 38 addresses who exactly the rent check is going to be paid to, and then it has the address that check is going to be delivered to. Now, of course, if it's an electronic payment or a wire transfer, you could just put an NA here. You can put an NA in any field that doesn't apply. Then there's a section for a late fee, and then these nice additional terms sections where you can just add in custom verbiage if there's some sort of unique arrangement you have. There's this very handy box, summary of initial fees, and this just breaks down what we've addressed above. It talks about the deposit, the first month rent, if there's any prorated rent. For example, if the tenant takes occupancy early or in the middle of a month and needs to pay the landlord for 10 days or 7 days, that prorated amount can be mentioned here and the dates can be stated. And any other fees that might be addressed, maybe pet deposit or some other random fee. And then the total amount. And this is the amount that the tenant's going to deliver to the landlord in order to begin this lease. And down here we have a section for keys. And of course this is important because it needs to be documented how many and which type of keys are given to the tenant. So if a key is lost, likely the landlord's going to deduct that from the deposit, or the tenant's going to have to pay for that. So it's good to itemize exactly what was delivered to the tenant for their use. Section about rekeying, parking, and subletting, of course, is not allowed without the landlord's consent. A section for smoking, and then more additional terms. These are very handy to write in. Anything that wasn't explicitly addressed above that you may want to add, you can write in here. The nice part about this form is you can customize nearly everything in it. And if you forget to, there's usually default verbiage that are already going to determine, like, for example, the first of the month that rent's due. So if you forgot to put in a certain date, it would automatically just revert to the default verbiage. Utilities. Now it says here exactly which utilities are being paid for by the tenant and which utilities are being paid for by the landlord. So there's no misunderstanding. It's here in writing and documented. Community restrictions, like if there's an HOA that has some sort of community restriction, and then of course you can add custom verbiage here. Pets, you check the box if there is a pet allowed on premises, and then if there are pets, it would be good to mention what type of pet and any other information that would allow the landlord or disclose to the landlord what as much information about that pet as possible. Now keep in mind, pets, of course, that can affect the landlord's homeowner's insurance policy. It has all sorts of ramifications, so it's important that if there are pets involved, it should be added here. Additional terms, again, nice extra auxiliary space to add any sort of provisions that weren't already mentioned in the contract. And then initial area. Now, there's a lot of boilerplate text here, which is, these are protections. So a lot of this is legally obligated to be disclosed, but also protections for both parties. The landlord's disclosing what they're supposed to, the tenants understanding that they have certain rights and that there are certain risks involved, like lead-based paint. That's what we're looking at right now, bed bugs, things like that. There's a dispute resolution section here that basically states if something goes wrong, that parties won't just outright sue each other and go right to litigation. They'll seek more amicable means to resolve their dispute, beginning with mediation and moving on from there if mediation is unsuccessful. There's other provisions here talking about fumigation and equal opportunity housing. If there's a broker involved, wire fraud, meaning if a tenant's sending wire transfers with their lease, they need to take precautions to make sure that they aren't scammed out of their money by accident. Of course, both parties will initial at the bottom of this page. Representative capacity, that just is if the owner, let's say the landlord owns the property in a trust. Well, really the trust is the landlord, but the trustee is signing the lease on behalf of the trust. So that should be disclosed to the tenant, that there's a trust involved and the landlord or the trustee is of the trust is acting as the landlord as they're signing this contract. Then more of this wonderful extra space, additional terms to write in any other provisions that needed to be stated but hadn't been already addressed in the contract. Then this is where the tenants are going to sign. This is where the landlord's going to sign. If there are brokers involved, they're going to sign here on this final page. And then both parties are going to initial at the bottom acknowledging that there are broker representatives involved. And that is the residential lease or rental agreement. I hope you found this helpful, and please find more forms on our website at openhomesale.com. Thank you.